business in the county seat, an opportunity to elect to stay overnight. Isn't there a phrase, and I don't have it in front of me, and this is what I'm responding to here, rather than drive back and forth to their residences? I believe, from memory, and because it affected my behavior here a few weeks ago, when I had work over here, but there was no board meeting, when I would have preferred to stay over here, but there was no board meeting that week. And as a result, according to policy, as I read it, could you have the board policy with regard to staying overnight? I believe it says, in a week in which there is a Board of Supervisors meeting. It is very much a restrictive element in the
Yeah,
policy.
I was just trying to look for the policy. I don't have the exact language, but I could, I'll look it up for you and let you know.
Because
But I think it's official board business as well, so there's committee meetings, board of supervisor meetings. I think it covers both, but let me look at the language and I can get back to you on that specifically.
Well, the problem being here is I'm not going to be very comfortable about voting for a policy that is less restrictive. I find it kind of interesting. I was going to say more restrictive, but now that I'm hearing that the drive back and forth to Boonville is an easy trip, 43 miles breaking the speed limit, 43 minutes breaking the speed limit at 58 miles an hour rather than 55 gets me here. For those who drive it once or twice from Wawalla once a week, yeah, getting from Wawalla is a heck of a long pool. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know if any supervisor who makes that trip on a regular basis here. For those who come in from Mendocino, I respect that, but on the average, 3 or 4 trips a week, round trip, in bad weather. We have snow in Boonville, and we have snow coming over that grade too. So just so we don't get too righteous here in our various points of view, I'm looking for consistency here rather than trying to make points about whether there are personal agendas involved here. I take some umbrage at the comment made by a member of the grand jury, badge on or badge off to that regard. But I wonder if we can get some clarification of that, if you're able to bring that up.
I'm looking for it, but Allison can speak to it.
Allison Glass, the Assistant CEO. Could you repeat the question, because I heard the tail end of the discussion and came on over?
Well, I'm looking for the policy. I mean, the conduct official business in the county seat, an opportunity to elect to stay overnight. That seems reasonable, perfectly reasonable, and should be supported. I support that 100%. But I'm just trying to make it consistent with a policy which, for some reason, was put in place that says in a week in which there is a Board of Supervisors meeting.
Right. So with the board policy, the intent was to provide some reasonable limit to paying what essentially was coming from people's place of residence to the place of work. And so the restriction was that it's a week that has a board meeting in it. And there was some discussion around whether it was, it says regular board meeting or whatever, but we're taking that to mean any board meeting at which all of the board members are present, whether it is one that was called on an emergency basis or a special basis or, regularly scheduled. It's an actual board meeting, as opposed to a committee meeting or an unofficial meeting with staff or those kinds of things. So that was a differentiation in the board policy. I think the issue from the grand jury standpoint is they need to be coming over for, well, we also removed the cap on the cost of the lodging. And we said that it had to be the government rate, but that it would be that. It would not be limited to the equivalency of the round-trip mileage. My understanding in the grand
No,
jury policy is that it is tied to the round-trip mileage or
it is
not.
No.
So it's not tied to the round-trip mileage. Okay, then you can decide if you want to have a limit to the number of times they can exercise this, or whether you tie it to an official grand jury meeting, or whether it's any time they're coming over for official business, which you would define, I guess, as a meeting of the entire grand jury and/or one of their committees. You know, you've got some options in that regard in working with the grand jury about that. So does that help answer?
Well, it doesn't help. It points out there are at least two major contradictions here in this.
Well, no, because the board policy is its own policy. There was no.
Well, I understand there are different policies.
They don't have to be the same.
Well, you know, I mean, the fact is, if you're sitting trying to explain to the grand jury, hour after hour, what the policy is and justify it, then it would be useful that those who utilize county resources to do their legitimate work should be consistent with the policies of those of us who, believe it or not, do legitimate work for the county as well. So all I'm looking for is some consistency so that there is not this attitude that somehow or other we are cheating and they're being extended. And that tone is something I would like to see just get the hell out of the room in future occasions, both the jury room and this room. But the fact of the matter is here, we're creating now further details, and there are inconsistencies, and they will be the gist of concerns further down. So what I'm saying here is, if there is that phrase, to elect to stay overnight rather than drive back and forth to their residencies, okay, on official business, that should be what we have in place as supervisors. What's the difference between a trip over here, back and forth, for official business as compared to official business that takes place in a week in which there is a regular Board of Supervisors meeting? That's my point.
Okay.
The second point here is, if we remove the cap, there will be additional expenses, contrary to what's been said, that may be coming forward. And I understand the grand jury's over budget right now, or at least in the most recent iteration we had just 2 weeks ago. The grand jury is outspending its allocation, if I'm not incorrect. So if that's and that was the argument made in the past when the budget was raised up here for the Board of Supervisors, we can't afford it. Well, why should we now be rather casually saying, yeah, sure, you're over budget, that's okay. We're going to give you another opportunity to spend more money in order to provide you with this very legitimate, very desirable option.
So if I could just add one other point of clarification, I'm going to sit down. You've got the board policy, you're discussing the grand jury travel policy at this point. You also have the employee travel policy. And what is stated in the employee travel policy maintains that link between, if you stay overnight, that it needs to be within the cost of the round trip mileage. And so that was retained. That is a meet and confer item, and it is something that has worked well for employees. But the travel is very clearly part of, an assignment, seeing a client, whatever, and so there is that tie. So just to let you know what the range is.
Right, but I would also point out the employees have their unions. That is a meet and confer item.
Yes.
The grand jury, as far as I know, does not have a union yet, and the Board of Supervisors will never be able to have a union because it implies unification.
Yeah.
Thank you, Supervisor. Supervisor Pinchas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to finalize on this, out-of-county travel is a fairly big issue in this county. Our total out-of-county travel is $668,000 in this budget year. So I would hopefully think that we can trim down a little bit on that. But in general, I served on this board since 4 years, from 95 to 98, in my second year in this term. And I have never seen any, no matter what the wording says in the policies and ordinance, I've never observed